For this list, we'll be looking at some of the reasons the massively popular sci-fi franchise has outgrown its creator. While Lucas has had a successful career with Star Wars, we will be focusing on his filmmaking issues, bad decisions, and occasional poor choice of words.
What orders from Mordor, my lord? What does the Eye command?
We have work to do.
I couldn't believe some of the things they wrote about the prequels, you know? I mean, but really, beyond, I didn't like it. You ruined my childhood, and I'm still angry about the way they treated Jake Lloyd. He was only 10 years old, that boy, and he did exactly what George wanted him to do. Believe me, I understand clunky dialogue. So I almost got hornswoggled in that documentary where they weren't calling it The People versus George Lucas at the time, but I could tell from the questions they were asking me, it was an open invitation to trash George.
George Lucas raped our childhood. 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 George Lucas raped our childhood.
And I have issues with George, but I love that man.
You go to make a movie and all you do is get criticized, and people try to make decisions about what you're going to do before you do it. You know, it's not much fun, and you can't experiment. You can't do anything. You have to do it a certain way. I don't like that. I never did. I started out in experimental films, and I want to go back to experimental films. But of course, nobody wants to see experimental films.
The main thing is to protect these characters. Make sure that they still continue to live in the way that you created them.
I'm curious that the Force doesn't get muddled into a bunch of garbly-gook.
Can I just say, though, a lot of times I would say to Ryan, we got to think about the fans. And he said, no, we got to think about the story, and we got to think about our movie. Which
Hello. Welcome back to Revenge of the Prequels, everyone. So admittedly, this was a very unexpected video that I did not plan to make, but I recently put out a thank you post on my community poll to all of you lovely people, and I got a recommendation in the comments that was simply too good to pass up. WatchMojo are basically every poor, misguided, brainless fool's introduction to the internet, at least for the first 6 months, presumably, which is when they have enough exposure to grow a brain and ditch their sorry ass. Sadly, I was more retarded than most, and it took me a long time to figure this out. The tipping point for when I hit the glorious unsubscribe button was when, minutes after a certain premiere happened while I was still at work, cunt Kojo decided to post the biggest spoiler of that premiere, and that entire series as a matter of fact, straight into their video's title and its thumbnail, in a means to try and force someone to watch their video. They do this quite a lot, in fact. And yes, I say the word force because if you already know what's going to happen, the attitude they hope you'll express is, oh shit, well now I gotta watch the video to see what happened. And most importantly, how. And again, they do this by denying a person's right to see what they want to see and the right to not have things spoiled for them. It's a common sense, unwritten rule on YouTube, not to spoil shit for people, especially within the first 24 hours of a premiere. Remember how pissed off people got with Avengers Endgame and the spoiler thumbs that were posted seconds after the premiere to garner attention? Well, not only does WatchMojo post shit, hollow, and pointless regurgitated videos with slightly differing titles since they are creatively bankrupt, but they have no respect for the very media they are covering. Anything new within minutes, they gotta have a 5 or 10 things, reasons, or missed video, ripe with spoilers in both the title and the thumbnail in a blatant attempt to coerce you for clicks, not giving a single shit about the viewer or online etiquette whatsoever. And for those reasons, this episode of Revenge of the Prequels is going to be particularly sweet, because in the blatant attempt to cover up for the commander of internet shills and the white-hot YouTube climate surrounding the Disney Star Wars backlash in early 2018, they decided to release this abortion. 5 reasons why Star Wars has surpassed George Lucas, firmly spreading their butt cheeks for the insertion of the mouse, and trying ever so desperately to suck up to whatever butthurt original trilogy fanatics and Disney apologists still remained to cash in on the George Lucas hate bandwagon, which has all but evaporated by that point in time. Anyway, just a quick reminder that this video is one of several in an ongoing series, so once you're done with this video, feel free to check out the past episodes. Also, I need to make a point that if you do not like the prequels, that's perfectly fine. I'm not chastising you or anyone else for how they feel. The goal of this series is to correct or counter shitty argumentation, misinformation, or just outright lying and contradictions directed towards George Lucas and the prequels. Now, with that said, now that I've made that clear, let's begin.
There's no denying his impact on Star Wars, but that influence only goes so far.
That influence only goes so far. Motherfucker, George Lucas is Star Wars. It literally wouldn't exist if not for him. Sure, you can buy the IP and own the property, but you can't buy the intellect. And without the intellect, no matter the quality, all Star Wars films going forward are merely imitations, not replications. You can't replicate an intellect, and George is the intellect, so fuck you.
Welcome to WatchMojo.com, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 5 reasons that Star Wars has surpassed George Lucas.
Alrighty then.
The exterior facade of things doesn't necessarily make one happy.
Before we begin, Number 5, the first cut of Star Wars needed to be completely re-edited. Lucas may have created one of the best sci-fi franchises of all time, but that doesn't mean he did it flawlessly. When his peers were shown the original cut, the reception was dreadful, littered with unnecessary scenes, terrible pacing, and an overload of exposition. It was clear that Star Wars needed some additional work.
You got a mouth bigger than meteor.
I'm quiet. Listen how quiet I am. You can barely hear me.
Yeah, I've heard people play this card a million times. Star Wars needed to be re-edited, and yeah, some extra scenes that weren't very good or were pointless were cut. Guess what? Every film that has a rough cut needs a re-edit. Every film. Every film needs to cut scenes that don't fit, take up too much space, or simply aren't portrayed well. Every single film. Martin Scorsese films, Steven Spielberg films, James Cameron films, every film. Every film needs to be recut and re-edited. So fuck you for trying to pin this flaw in filmmaking as a whole squarely on George Lucas. I'm going to come back to this point a little bit later on in the video, but you want to know what other film needed to be re-edited but sadly wasn't redrafted? It was this abomination you rats a shilling for, made by this hack fraud son of a bitch.
Brian De Palma would rewrite the opening crawl, and Richard Chew, Paul Hirsch, and Lucas's wife Marcia would re-edit the movie.
Yeah, under George's supervision. Let's make that clear. They were implementing George's editing changes that he requested, and any and all creative changes that they wanted to implement needed to be approved by George as well.
Had Lucas gone with the original version, the history of Star Wars could have gone drastically different.
Oh, are you sure this is what you want?
Again, every film goes through this. And what's your point exactly? I don't quite see how this plays into Star Wars surpassing George Lucas, because like it or not, George is the creative vision behind Star Wars. He's the original author, the original filmmaker, and director. The man was a young, inexperienced writer and filmmaker at the time, and this is what he managed to create. Saying he had some help along the way is nothing that should be held against the man, nor his legacy or creation. Every film is a collaborative effort with different levels of creative control, and there's a reason Star Wars wasn't a failure, because Lucas had the foresight and humility to trust the voices of those closest to him, the same friends who would later insist that he helmed the beloved prequel trilogy entirely by himself.
He reached out to 3 other directors for the prequels, but no one was ready to follow the original trilogy. Academy Award-winning director Ron Howard said this on the Happy Sad Confused podcast. He didn't necessarily want to direct them. He told me he had talked to Robert Zemeckis, Steven Spielberg, and me. I was the 3rd one he spoke to. They all said the same thing. George, you should do it. I don't think anybody wanted to follow up that act at the time. It was an honor, but it would have been too daunting.
Because they had faith, and rightfully so, in the man's ability. And of course, and most importantly, his right to create. Not only that, but George took it upon himself to initiate and supervise the re-edit and redraft of his work, and has even said that he respects the craft of editing film more than any other aspect of filmmaking.
Making a film is like buying lumber
or cutting down trees and making wood out of it. Where editing is like actually constructing a house. I mean, you actually can see it, you can see what you're doing and deal with it. Everybody says, well, the script doesn't work, but we'll fix it later. And they said, well, we're shooting this, but it isn't really working, but we'll fix it in the editing. Well, the editing is where it's got to be fixed. If it doesn't work there, the movie doesn't work. So that's, to me, the most exciting part.
An important lesson he no doubt learned from his time making the original Star Wars. So yeah, Star Wars probably would have failed if the original cut was released. Same as any other film in existence, more or less. But there's a reason the original cut was never released. And there's a reason why Star Wars was a success. That is undoubtedly because of George Lucas, and to claim otherwise is ludicrous.
Number 4, his bitterness.
They looked at the stories and they said, we want to make something for the fans.
It's no secret that Lucas has been a little petty about his post-Star Wars life.
Whoa, hold on. Don't cut off that small segment of Charlie Rose out of context. Play the full clip.
They looked at the stories and they said, we want to make something for the fans. So I said, all I wanted to do was tell a story of what happened. It started here and it went there. And it's all about generations, and it's about, the issues of fathers and sons and grandfathers, and it's a family soap opera. I mean, ultimately. We call it space opera, but people don't realize it's actually a soap opera. And it's all about family problems and it's not about spaceships. These are my kids. So
all those Star Wars films.
All the Star Wars films.
They were your kids.
Yeah, well, they are. I loved them. I created them. I'm very intimately involved in them, and obviously
sold them.
I sold them to the white slavers that take these things and.
Okay, but having said all that, and having talked to you for the last, and known you for a while, and admired you, it must hurt you.
Well,
it's your family. It's the last story. It's your story.
But
it's
in the end,
you.
I knew there's 3 more stories. And I knew that was going to probably take, to do it right would take about 10 years. And I said, I'm 70. I don't know whether I'll be here when I'm 80. Every 10 years the odds get less. And so I said, and I'm not ready to do that because I want to do these other things. So I have to make the decision on my own that it's time for me to move on.
The man just wanted to tell a story regarding his own creation that is his very right to fucking create. Now, you'd think a company purchasing an IP they do not understand would have some humility and respect for the creator's input and use his story treatments that the original creator provided, but nope, not Disney. And since we're playing the 3-second clip game, we shall play another few juicy clips.
The main thing is to protect these characters. Make sure that they still continue to live in the way that you created them.
Again, and I told Brian this, it's no surprise. I said, I just fundamentally disagree with your concept of this character and how you use him. And to a certain extent, it's not Luke's story anymore.
I'm just going to break in here and make sure that everybody out there realizes he is so significantly important to this next film. You have no idea.
Well, that's good to hear.
Mr. Modesty.
I think I've made my point. Now, in regards to George's bitterness, there is a valid reason for that, which coincidentally enough has been brought to light recently, and we will get into that in a moment.
His statements have come off as either extremely over the top or just plain passive-aggressive.
Okay, not exactly sure what Red Tails has to do with the post-Star Wars bitterness. That was a weird editing choice.
For starters, he's gone on to blame the fans for his retirement, citing how people despise the newer versions of the original trilogy.
Yeah, it's safe to say there was a lot of fanatical fan backlash from people who never quite took off their Boba Fett pajamas as adults. That would drive anyone insane. Honestly, I'm surprised the man put up with all that shit for as long as he did. And that's not even going in depth on the butthurt internet retards who regularly dipped their brown noses into the online Star Wars prequel hate bandwagon because blah blah blah, where's my New Hope 2.0? Now eventually they got it, and yes, they ate that shit right up and continue to endorse the usurpers of Star Wars no matter how shit they get, because when you whine long enough and what you get is worse than what you had, You gotta defend that purchase so you don't look like an absolute schmuck.
I prefer the original trilogy myself, but in the eyes of the fandom as a whole, the prequels have been validated through time. I mean, shit, assholes like me got on camera, said, George Lucas and his prequels, yeah, Disney's gonna do their own thing, it's gonna be awesome. We paved the way for them, we validated them, we gave them the green light. I mean, I can't speak for everybody. I feel like I did, though. Anyhow, George Lucas, I'm sorry.
Now, that said, again, George Lucas has been quoted saying that he left because of the fan hatred, and more specifically because of the internet. As you can see in the quote above, and again, who can blame him for leaving? It's the very reason people like me are so pissed off. Since I never had an issue with George, I didn't have an issue with his decisions, and I didn't have an issue with his movies. And even if I did, it's nothing I'd urge the man to leave his creation for. Seems to me like you're trying to paint it as George left out of spite when nothing could be further from the truth.
I'm doing this so that the films will have a longer life, and so that more fans and people can enjoy them into the future. It's a very big universe I've created, and there's a lot of stories that are sitting in there.
He left his property in the hands of people he thought he could trust so that the films could continue for the fans. The money from the sale he received, he donated the majority of which to charity, and despite the ridiculous online hatred, George has never lashed out at the fans, at least to my knowledge. He's always shown a huge degree of professionalism, and that's more than I can say for Kathleen Kennedy and her cesspool of dogs.
Lastly, he has come off as resentful towards the new Star Wars movies, criticizing the retro approach to The Force Awakens, and going so far as to compare the Walt Disney Company to white slavers.
I sold them to the white slavers that take these things and
Yeah, he's pissed, as are we all, that Disney would plagiarize his first movie and retell it for some cheap, gullible, original trilogy fanatical praise. It was a shallow piece of garbage designed to be as nostalgia-pinching as possible, but more importantly and most recently in Cock Eager's autobiography, he explains how he reneged on a gentleman's agreement he made with George that he used as a negotiation tool to acquire the IP, making it clear to George that they wanted to buy and use his story treatments for the sequel films. Disney, being the corporate cunts that they are, chose the shallowest and most insulting approach to both Lucas and the fans. Instead of using those story treatments, they drafted the script for what is now known as The Force Awakens, and Cock Eager quotes, upon hearing this news, George Lucas felt betrayed. That's the head of Disney, his own words regarding how the Star Wars transaction went down. George has every right to be bitter, but that has nothing to do with your supposed video, How Star Wars Has Surpassed George Lucas. Go suck Mickey Mouse's dick, you fast food online garbage.
Number 3. Arguably, the two best films in the series weren't directed by him. While Lucas was successful as the director of A New Hope, albeit after some fixing up with the story,
you couldn't just leave it at George did a good job. No. You gotta throw that little asterisk on everything positive you say, because you have a narrative to sell. And I'm so glad you brought this up. I'm gonna let you go down the rabbit hole, but before I do, even though George wasn't the credited director on episodes 5 and 6, he still wrote like 90% of their stories, at the very least, and was heavily involved in both productions. The directors simply hold the camera and command the set. Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams are reasonably capable directors, and both of their movies were almost universally despised. So to use this as some crutch as Star Wars is better without George's involvement is asinine. Granted, you can make a good Star Wars fanfiction movie without George. Rogue One, in my personal opinion, is a prime example. But that movie is still fanfiction. And that's not what your video is titled. It's 5 reasons why Star Wars has surpassed George. It's a hit piece on George, saying that George was only holding Star Wars back and is better off without him, and that the fans deserve better than his treatment of his own creation. Have a ginormous fuck you on that account.
He wouldn't direct another Star Wars movie until The Phantom Menace. So who directed the two best movies in the series?
Yeah, he was busy building his house with his wife and dealing with marriage issues on the accounts of episodes 5 and 6. And on the account of him not directing for 15 years, he was simply trying to raise his adopted children. Wow, what an evil person. People try to frame him as this greedy businessman who wanted to merchandise the hell out of his product and resell it to you 1,000,000 times over. First off, given Disney's treatment of Star Wars, that claim is just laughable in 2019. And secondly, yeah, he merchandised his brand and people bought it. I bring this up because this is the counter-argument people use, and it's bullshit. If you bought the Star Wars Lego books, the video games, movies, and action figures, that's your own fucking problem. George didn't have a gun to your head. Stop cooking shit up to villainize the guy. Blame yourselves. So yeah, to sum up, regardless of what anyone tells you, George Lucas left to run the company and raise his kids. Like an ordinary person, an ordinary dad, an ordinary businessman. And I think no one buys the argument of greed anymore, since we've seen how charitable the man has been in recent years, and seeing what greed can actually look like when Star Wars is in the hands of a corporation like Disney. Anyway, let's continue.
Irvin Kershner was chosen by Lucas to direct The Empire Strikes Back because, according to Lucas, Kershner knew, quote, everything a director was supposed to know. Then we have Richard Marquand, whose previous work on suspense films and ability to work with actors was what made Lucas hire him as director for Return of the Jedi.
I've got to save you.
You already have.
Now, I have all the respect in the world for Irvin Kershner, but this is a common misconception regarding the production of Star Wars Episode 5. Remember how there was a whole segment in this very lazy and shitty-ass video that WatchMojo decided to churn out about how Star Wars was saved in the edit? As I said, every film is saved in the edit. Even The Empire Strikes Back. According to this article from Screen Rant, and I'm sure several other sources you can find if you decide to go digging, this was published in 2016, back when prequel hate was still relatively high on the internet. It's 15 things you never knew about The Empire Strikes Back. And what's fun fact number 7? The first cut of The Empire Strikes Back was a disaster. A disaster! Let's read through it, shall we? With shooting way behind schedule and costs running out of control on The Empire Strikes Back, George Lucas started to panic. With his entire personal fortune invested in production on Empire, the failure of the movie would mean persona and professional ruin. Shooting wrapped up and George Lucas breathed a sigh of relief. Then came the screening of the disastrous rough cut, which left Marsha Lucas in tears. George Lucas exploded, furious with Gary Kurtz and Irvin Kershner at having spent his personal fortune to make a bad movie. Lucas tried re-editing the movie himself to no avail. He then decided to film extensive reshoots, reworking the Han and Leia subplot that raised the cost of the picture even more, as Lucas had to divert funds from construction of Skywalker Ranch to keep his movie shooting, and also he had to approach Fox for a loan, which production executive Alan Ladd Jr. helped him secure. Ladd would later quit Fox over the loan when Empire became a runaway hit. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you how Empire Strikes Back was saved in the edit. Just the way every film is saved in the edit, in one form or another. It's funny how no one on the internet pushed this when they were doing so much research into George Lucas and how much of an evil corporate hack he was. Of course, the reason you didn't hear about this is because it contradicts their entire internet narrative regarding the man. Meaning, the bread and butter of these internet personalities is simply pouring out hyperbolic fuel on misinformation or simply just outright lying to you. Anyway, the point is, yes, George Lucas wasn't the credited director, but he was far more involved with Episode 5 and 6 than most people think. And yeah, if your case is Star Wars has surpassed George Lucas, then so far you've done a miserable job at conveying it.
Number 2, some of the best writing was done by Lawrence Kasdan.
Yeah, I don't know about that, mate. But of course, you try to frame it as that. You try to frame it as all of the good stuff is because of the other guy in the writer's room.
If you only knew the power of the dark side.
Credit where credit is due. Lucas knows how to build a world. However, you need good writing to make your world believable.
Same goes for this video. And fuck off, I dare you to name a film series that isn't based on a novel with a world that's compelling and interesting, which can hold a candle to the 6 mainline Lucas Star Wars films. Not easy, is it? Because Lucas cooked up one hell of a universe, and he did make it convincing. It's why we kept showing up, you idiot.
Lucas may have had the vision, but it was his partnership with Lawrence Kasdan that gave Star Wars some of its strongest story arcs, specifically in Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Kasdan's presence seems to have a subtle effect on the quality of the movie's writing, and it's evident in the reception of the prequel trilogy, which Kasdan had no part in.
Okay, there's a few problems with this. Firstly, you don't provide any examples for what you claim in Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Secondly, you're saying Kasdan has merit because he wasn't involved with the prequels. My answer to that is bullshit. Things could have turned out worse or better. What ifs are a double-edged sword. Traditionally, one does work better in collaboration, sure. But again, you're trying to discredit Lucas specifically with this one aspect of filmmaking, and the prequels have excellent writing in its story, albeit some contrivances here and there. And in regards to the dialogue, most people misinterpret the chosen script as bad writing, despite the lines being character consistent. Look, it's a long discussion, but basically, if you're painting the prequels as, oh no, if only Lawrence Kasdan was involved, then you can kindly go fuck yourself.
He wouldn't be back to writing a Star Wars story until The Force Awakens, which he co-wrote with J.J. Abrams and Michael Arndt.
That really does not work in your favor. And yeah, he wrote The Force Awakens, meaning he stole from George along with J.J. Abrams to make that plagiarized dumpster fire. Great case you're making there for Lawrence Kasdan, you retard.
And I'm really impressed. I think you have a future in this. I really do.
Number 1. The prequels.
Fucking about time. Took him long enough to get here. Also, I love how he just says the prequels, almost as if it's like a chore to say those words. We all knew this was what the video was building to, and just as I've been saying, the internet is still trying to defend their purchase. See, Disney isn't the problem. Look at the prequels. Remember the prequels? Yeah, I do. I remember the prequels, and they were glorious. Just fucking glorious. Hashtag OG Lucas.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme. Every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one.
This was the first time where Lucas had absolute control over the entire production.
Ah, those were the days. Take me back.
And he blew it.
He sure did, ejaculating his brilliance all over our movie screens. What a time to be alive.
As if re-editing the original trilogy with terrible CGI wasn't enough.
Oh, so you mean remastering the poorly aged, washed out original 3 movies by improving sound, lighting, and visual clarity? CGI edits to make the films better and more immersive? Shit yes, sign me up. I'll take the special editions, thanks. I honestly don't care what your gripes are with the special editions. Fact is, they added way more positives into the product than negatives. And you're lying if you deny that. Search your feelings. You know it to be true.
The prequels saw a slew of mistakes that fans just weren't having.
You were the chosen one!
Many scenes were shot in front of a green screen.
So fucking what? I think what you meant to say was the prequels were the first feature-length motion pictures to pioneer digital filmmaking technology in a major production. Yep, they did that. Also, more practical effects were used in the prequels than the entire OT combined. Check this forum if you're curious regarding my statement on that account. Again, it's not a story the mainstream internet would tell you. The green screens were used in backdrop portions to add atmosphere in dynamic sci-fi settings for the prequels, or during large-scale fights. The CGI was used more bombastically, sure, but it was used to give us things like the Clone Wars, the Gungan War, and the Battle of Coruscant. Nothing wrong with that. Go back to the original trilogy, plenty of green screens were used.
Hayden Christensen was cast as Anakin Skywalker.
And that's a negative because...
And, of course, there's Jar Jar Binks.
Binks is a mad lad. Better than the Ewoks, Jar Jar didn't grind the movies to a prolonged halt, and better than Boba Fett. At least Jar Jar gets shit done, and he did it without even looking cool.
Your support is well seen.
The trilogy of Darth Vader's beginnings has stuck out as the pimple on the franchise, and may always be remembered as its awkward puberty.
My friend, you are so very out of touch. Get yourself fixed.
Do you agree with our picks? Check out these other great clips from WatchMojo and...
Yeah, no thanks, buddy. I'll pass. And that's the end of that. Checked another idiot off the list. Now, I didn't want to leave on such a down note. With that said, there is one redeeming quality about this video. The comment section. Now, if you're curious, and once you're done leaving your dislike on WatchMojo's video, feel free to browse down and check some of them out. But just to wrap this video up, I'm going to read you some of my personal favorites. Don't mind me, just came to dislike and read the comments. Looks at the like-dislike ratio. I love democracy. This should be a try not to get angry video. How much did Disney pay you? Gee, it's chilly in here. Next you guys will say how great EA are at managing gaming productions. Read the title and immediately thought it was a joke vid. Ah, what legends. Some excellent comments. Each of those gave me a huge, satisfying laugh. So anyway, that pretty much ends the video. Thanks for staying till the end. I appreciate it, and a huge shout out to all of my patrons and subscribe stars for the very kind donations. If you would like to support the channel with a monthly donation, the links for those will be in the description. Also, if you'd like to chat with me and my community, check out the public Discord. Link is also in the description, where we talk about all kinds of things that may interest you. All relevant links are in the description, including links to other Star Wars videos. Be sure to chuck this video a like, share it around to those who are interested, and click the bell for more videos. Hope you enjoyed, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.
The main thing is to protect these characters. Make sure that they still continue to live in the way that you created them.
I sold them to the white slavers.
Star Wars The Phantom Menace was the most disappointing thing since...
Share your energy with me! Spirit box meeting! This is great.